Good afternoon and welcome to today's EuroSTAR webinar, Keys for Transitioning from Traditional to Agile Testing with Bob Galen. My name is Miriam and I will be your webinar organizer for today. Before I hand you over to Bob, I would just like to bring a few things to your attention. Today's webinar will be recorded and you will receive an email once it's available. So today's webinar will last for approximately 30 minutes and there will also be time for questions at the end. If we don't get to any questions, you can also email Bob directly at bob@rgalen.com. So without further delay, I will let Bob take over. When you're ready, Bob.
All right, thank you, Miriam. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I want to thank Miriam and EuroSTAR Conferences for inviting me in for this talk this morning or this afternoon. Just FYI for everyone, it's morning for me, but I'm awake, so that's the good news for this presentation, is that I'm at least alert and I've had plenty of coffee this morning. So we want to talk about the 7 keys for transitioning to Agile testing. There's nothing magical from my point of view about the number 7. It's just some areas that I think I wanted to explore as part of this webinar. I think they're the most important, or they're important areas. I don't know if they're the most important, but it's things that I want to get you thinking about when you're moving from traditional, what I would call traditional testing, to Agile testing. And when I say traditional, I'm not frowning or anything like that. I'm actually very respectful and have a lot of experience in traditional testing, but I think it's a challenge for many teams and many testers when they are trying to move or become Agile. And that was one of the drivers for this talk. The outline, I'm taking a format of myths and realities. There's a show, a TV show in the U.S. called Mythbusters, and they bust myths, and that's sort of the format that I wanted to take, tongue-in-cheek, for the webinar. There's 7 areas we want to talk about: transforming your team, automation, test automation. Planning and scripting. What I mean by scripting is putting test cases together. Testing within the sprint, so the activity of testing within a sprint or an iteration. The role of testers, retrospectives. I want to sort of explore that a little bit, and then I want to end up with the customer, and that's probably where I should start. So I think I'm saving the best for last, is that customer interface. So the first myth is transforming your team. The myth is you need all programmers or highly technical testers when you move to Agile, and I hear this a lot in my travels, in my coaching, in my consulting, when I go to conferences and things. It's a lot of folks, and it's actually increasing over time. There's more and more discussion around you need programmers or programmer-like skills for testers in Agile teams, and I sort of disagree with that. I think the reality is that a mix is best. Of manual, domain-centric testers, folks who really understand the problem domain, the business domain, folks who have fundamental skills when it comes to manual or functional testing. They're not automation experts. They have some technical skills, so they can go in and inquire. They have some SQL skills, for example, and they could inquire of databases, and they could look at results in databases and things, but they're not ostensibly programmers. Now, I do think another part of the mix is some programming or scripting skills is required. So I like to think of this as a curve, that you have sort of an equalized curve, and maybe 30% really excellent, functional testers with strong domain-centric skills. Maybe 30% of the team has some programming, scripting skills, a modicum of programming skills, or just awareness. And then I think another 30%, and there's nothing magical about the numbers, it's just a communication device. So no one jot this down and start being prescriptive to your teams, please. But another 30% that maybe do have programming skills, that maybe are programmers and have deep skills in writing whatever code is in your technology stack. I think another sort of missed and important skill is soft or collaborative skills in the teams. That I think some programmers and some testers, in my experience, they don't play well with others. And I'm not just picking on the testers. It's team members that don't play well with others. I don't know if they do very well in Agile teams at all. It's a collaborative. It's a team sport. It's a collaborative sport. you have to be thick-skinned. You have to be able to give feedback and take feedback and do it healthily and do it well. I actually think that's probably the most fundamental skill that's required of Agile teams in this mix of skills, is sort of the soft or the collaborative skills. I think something I'll throw in there also is the ability to learn. You want to be growing and learning your skills all the time. So that's something, you don't want to be static in your skills. You don't want to be lackadaisical in your skills. You want to be a continuous learner. And I think that's part of it as well. So these skills are changing. No matter where you're at, you're constantly challenging yourself to get better. And then another reality is, I think you want to throw out this notion of a developer to tester ratio. It's sort of a guideline. In my coaching, I always ask the question of teams, what are your developers to tester ratio? It's not a ratio question. It's a, are you investing in testers question. Do you view testing as a profession? Have you seeded your teams with professional testers? And that's where I'm going with the question. There is no magical ratio. In fact, if there are no testers on the team, it doesn't give the team a get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to testing and quality. It just puts that burden on the remaining team members. So if you have a team composed of all developers, they have to test. They have to test thoroughly. They have to test all aspects at all dimensions of the product. And it puts a lot of pressure on them to do that. So I think you want to throw out that thinking that there's a magical ratio or something. It's not that important. It's a whole team view. The second myth is around automation, and the myth is you need 100% automation to start Agile testing. So you can't really enter the game in this myth without having high degrees of automation. Hit a button at night, come in the morning, and you have all of these test results that you can comb through in the morning to give you feedback. That's what you want. So part of the myth, the subtext to the myth, is you really need automation in Agile. There's a tremendous focus. There's tremendous value in having, broad brush automation in place. It gives you feedback. It helps with quality. It helps you move quickly. It helps the team sort of refactor with courage. There's a lot of benefit to it, but it's the start. You need it to start, and there's so many teams that don't have it to start. So now then they're lost. They're sort of stuck. It's like, well, I need it, but I can't convince the business to give me 6 months to create automation infrastructure, so then I can't be Agile. And that's the myth. I think the reality is you can start. You can have zero automation. You can start being Agile. You just need to doggedly start putting together a strategy where you're building up an automation base. The reality is also that there are some excellent open source tools out there that you can use, things like Selenium and Fitness and Cucumber and a myriad of other tools, and Water and Watton. There's tools that you can use in the open source space, and you don't want to be, singularly tool focused. I find in my teams and in my coaching that multiple tools, you bring multiple tools to bear. You bring a user interface-centric tool to bear. You bring Cucumber to bear in the middle tier. You actually take credit for unit testing at the lower level. So, at iContact we used PHP. We were a PHP stack, so we would use PHP unit. That's part of your automation sort of mix, your automation strategy. There's this notion of an Agile test automation pyramid that I think Mike Cohn was the originator of. And I think I saw it around 97, 98 or something. So it's a little dated. So it's been around for a while, and it's really my approach. It's the guiding vision that I've used in quite a few instances of driving Agile automation, is applying the pyramid strategy, and to great effect. It's a wonderful strategy. It says don't get stuck. Don't do all automation from the user interface. Don't do all automation from the unit test level, from the lower level of the app, but sort of have a multi-tiered approach, and then be dogged or ruthless in your pursuit of automation, and take a whole team view. Another reality is it's not just the testers. So any testers listening in, if you have a parochial view to say, well, we own automation, since we have test in our title, we have to write all test automation, stop that thinking. The reality is you want to foster a whole team view where you're a partner in developing that strategy. You're probably championing the pyramid strategy, but you're not writing every test. You're not automating every test. You're trusting your development colleagues to help. You're partnering with them, and they're contributing to that mix. And they're actually contributing mightily. So normally most of the unit tests, most of the testing automation is at the unit level, the majority of it. So you're trusting them, you're moving towards trusting them and collaborating with them to develop that. I have a picture, I think, on the next slide that talks about, this is the pyramid from Cone, where you invest more at the unit test level, let's say 40 to 50%, at the acceptance test or the API level or the middle tier below the UI, another 30 to 40%. And you reserve tests, just a small number of tests for the UI level, because it's so brittle up there. That's really why. There's a level of size of these tests. There's a level of brittleness or maintenance comes into play. So you want to invest in the majority of your tests being less brittle or less sensitive to maintenance, and you want to broaden that maintenance out to everyone on the team. So, for example, the developers, when they break a unit test, it's their responsibility to fix that unit test as part of moving forward. So they're refactoring both code and their test framework. To the right is actually at eye contact. It's an example of our investment. So I just wanted to prove that I practice what I preach, and this is a snapshot in time. I think it was 4 or 5 months ago of our mix of UI. We had 16 UI-centric Selenium, sort of workflow-oriented, gold feature workflow-oriented tests. In the middle tier, we segmented across system and integration boundaries. So we had roughly 1,400 to 1,500 tests in the middle tier, mostly Cucumber-driven, a little bit of PHP unit. And then unit tests, we had over 10,000, probably now 12,000 PHP unit tests. So you can see, and that's our automation. That when I say automation at that company, it's not just these 16 tests. It's all of these tests working in combination to test the application. The third myth I want to explore a bit is test planning and test scripts. So the myth is you don't need to plan. You don't need any stinking plans like test plans or any planning whatsoever. It just happens. And you don't need functional test cases. Automation takes care of everything. So it sort of links to that third myth from that point of view. The reality, at least from my point of view, and you'll hear debate in the community around this, and I want you to just sort of ignore the debate and listen to me. I'm just kidding. But I think plans really help the team focus on risk-based testing required within an iteration and then across a release. So I think in terms of 2 levels of what I would call test planning, there's iteration test planning, and then there's, if you're accumulating iterations towards a release event, then you think about release planning. So how am I testing across multiple iterations and teams and leading towards an integration event and a regression event or a system test event leading towards a deployment or a release, a primary release, a system release of software. The planning, for me, I'm going to say something that you might not like, but I don't care about the plan so much. So I remember at iContact, I introduced to the team there, I said, the teams were struggling with poor testing and poor collaboration in the sprints. And I asked the teams, I sort of was prescriptive, I said, I want every team for every sprint to sit down and write a test plan. I didn't prescribe the template. I didn't prescribe the headings and the subheadings. But what I did say is I want a written test plan, 1 to 2 pages, where the team sits down and they talk about the key strategies, the key test points, the risks that they're going to mitigate, how they're going to attack the sprint in a plan. And it wasn't just QA or the testers. That was one of the problems that drove me to suggest this, is that the testers would be in a vacuum trying to plan testing. I said I want the entire team to sit down and review the document. I want it to be the team's test plan. And I told the team flat out, I didn't care that you archived the test plan. Sure, it was on a wiki, so it was archived. But what you wrote wasn't the point. That the team had conversations around strategies, and they took a whole team view, and then they collaborated throughout the sprint. I wanted the activity. I wanted the collaboration. The test plan was a secondary result. It was the collaboration that I was driving. And that turned things around. Having that artifact, if you will, that the team could sort of converse around became very powerful. Now take that up a level, and we would do the same thing at a release level. And it would create cross-team collaboration and cross-team, discovery of cross-team dependencies and integration issues and things like that, and any deployment issues, like are we ready for a mature production release? And the same logic would apply. Another reality is test cases. Helpful. I think we do write test cases. We do write things down. You do have a template, if you will. You probably want to lighten the weight of it. You don't want to, have heavy weight. You want to assume that you have solid testers. You want to assume that domain experience is evident. You don't want to write things down for the clueless or for college students just entering, or in case you were afraid that your group is going to get acquired by another group. We need to write everything down. I don't think you have fear, uncertainty, and doubt-driven writing. I think you write what's necessary for the team and only write, so just enough, just in time test cases, but you do it. I think it really helps. It's mandatory in regulated environments, but it helps to write things down, but to lean it or to agilify it, that's not a word, but to lean what you do, to make it, to trust the team's judgment in writing those test cases. And then the other reality is you're never going to automate everything. So what fills in the gap? Not everything, there's not a business case for every bit of automation. Not every test can be automated. There might be hardware implications or cost implications. So you're going to have tests that are manually driven. You're going to have hopefully exploratory tests, and you're going to have charters that you're driving. So write some of those things down, but minimally do that. The fourth myth is you simply need to run 100% of the tests within the constraints of the sprint, quote unquote, that's Agile. And what I'm poking at here is there's never test debt. The assumption is, or the myth is, that you run everything in the sprint. You have to, you can. And nothing escapes the sprint from a test coverage perspective. Well, in a lot of contexts with high degrees of automation, that might be possible. So small applications, small environments, small numbers of teams with high degrees of automation, you can achieve that. But what if you can't? What if you have 100% of your tests are actually manual test cases, functional tests, regression tests, and if you ever chose to run 100% of those in a sprint, you would, quote unquote, derail the sprint. You would defocus. You would not provide results and business results. Now running a subset of them is possible. And running a risk-based subset of them is possible and actually probably the right thing to do. But what do you do with the exposure now that you've not run a set of tests? You're increasing your test debt, your coverage debt, sprint over sprint over sprint. A lot of Agilists just have the 100% proposition, and I think the reality is that it's rarely possible in most or many contexts. And you need a high degree of automation and business support to get there. And high degrees of test automation and continuous integration and continuous deployment environments. So I think the reality is most teams need to adopt, who are not in that sweet spot, need to adopt a risk-based approach, a multifaceted, multi-tool approach. I've personally used exploratory testing quite successfully in these environments. So I've done, while I've been catching up on the automation side, I've been doing high degrees of risk-based functional test, manual test execution, picking the right targets, picking the right battles, and I've also been catching up with automation. And then I've been also doing some exploratory testing along the way. And also I've been using a hardening or a stabilization sprint, a pre-release sprint or sprints to sort of beat down the technical test debt that I've accrued over time to get that coverage, to get that pre-release coverage. I see this particularly important in regulated environments where you have these traceability, these demands on traceability and prove what you've tested. You can't incrementally get there along the way. You would have derailed yourself along the way. So you pick moments in time as part of your release planning to do hardening or to do stabilization. There's something called the release train by Dean Leffingwell, and he talks about having a different tempo. There's sprint tempo and then there's release tempo. And I think of stabilization as being relative to release tempo. The fifth myth is that the testers alone own quality and testing practices within each team and sprint. So it's sort of this burden. I think of Jacob Marley, and there's chains, and sort of he's dragging those chains behind him. That the quality proposition. So this myth is, quality is totally the burden of the testers, and sort of everyone else, the Scrum Master and the product owner and the developers on the team and the BAs on the team, they get a, they get a get out of jail free card when it comes to owning quality. And if a bug pops out of the sprint, it's, you ask those pesky testers, why didn't you catch that? That's a myth. The reality is that I think testers foster a whole team view towards quality. I'd like to see testers in Agile teams focusing less, believe it or not, focusing less on testing, 8 hours a day, 10 days a week, test, test, test. Yes, they're testing, but they're also focusing on quality practices. They're focusing on getting the requirements right up front. They're focusing on collaborating with the customer, with the product owner. They're focusing on asking really hard and good questions about what problems are we trying to solve? Is this the simplest possible solution that we could deliver to the customer? They're asking the customer that question directly. So they're serving as the reality, or I hope the reality is that you can influence this, is you're serving as a guide for the team. You're testing the hard bits. So clearly you need to test the most challenging aspects, just like the most experienced developers should be tackling the most challenging technical problems. You're tackling the hard bits in the sprint, but you're also freely delegating to other team members. You're allowing them. You're trusting the developers to write good tests. You're trusting the developers to be able to test, and you're not questioning them all the time. You're not hovering around them. You trust them as partners. You train them if necessary. You facilitate exploratory testing sessions. You're finding more interesting and valuable tests. So you're never resting on your laurels with an existing regression suite. We're constantly, or we need to be constantly looking for what tests can we retire because they no longer have business value, and what tests can have more value. What can we replace it with? What is the most relevant, mix of tests that we could run today based on where the application is today? And you're working heavily with the product owners in focusing on that. You're not focusing on requirements. You're focusing on the problems and how do we solve, the customer's problems. That's a mix. I think in terms of being a quality champion would be a way of capturing this. I think this is one of the most important roles that you have. It's also one of the most challenging, I think, to actually implement in reality. Now, linking to that previous view, I think retrospectives are this underutilized or underthought of place to really make a huge difference in teams. One of the Agile sort of manifesto points, or one of the the principles of agility, is the notion of continuous improvement. And I see so many teams today that they say that, they give it lip service, but actually if you look under the covers, they're not challenging themselves enough. They're not being honest with themselves enough. They're not, what I call putting the 800-pound gorillas on the table, meaning what are the true things that are inhibiting the team from getting to a higher level of performance, a higher level of quality, a higher level of delivery, a higher level of throughput. And so the myth is testers are second-class citizens who don't play an active part in the project and team. And it's not just in the retrospective. I mean, I'm emphasizing the retrospective aspects here, but I see testers in sprint planning sessions. The developers are very actively collaborating, asking questions about a user story of the product owner, et cetera, and then they're doing, in a planning poker session, people are throwing, estimates of the cards, and the testers are sort of in the background. They're not being active. Then they'll vote. Typically, their votes are high. They really don't necessarily understand the story, but they haven't asked any questions, so they're in the background. The developers throw a 5 and the testers throw a 20 as far as estimates. Then they acquiesce because the developers beat them into submission, and the testers don't have the courage to stand up to it. So a 5 wins, if you will, meaning it's a 5 level of effort versus 20. It'll take less time. And they sort of, pale into the background again, even more in sprint planning. They're not necessarily a first-class citizen of the team. Now, it's not just the tester's fault with that. It's that the Scrum Master should be fostering that. The product owner should be asking questions of them, engaging them. So the coaches should be engaging them. But the testers have this second-class mindset, and that's the myth. The reality is you're a first-class citizen. You're a member of the team. You're there to make a difference. And you're not just there to test, quote-unquote, to test to make a difference. You're there to make a difference holistically across every aspect of what's going on within the team. So you're fostering continuous improvement within the team. You're setting the example. You show vulnerability. One of the things is teams don't ask for help. One of my observations is teams are reluctant, not just developers, but team members are reluctant to ask for help early enough. They'll struggle too long. Their pride gets in the way. They don't want to show weakness. They don't want to admit to the team that they overestimated or underestimated the work. And they'll hold on to stories too long without getting help from the team. I think testers can show that example of raising your hand in a daily stand-up and saying, I need help. I don't understand this story. The acceptance tests aren't helping me. They're not helping me to figure out how to test it. I need to, product owner, can you sit down with me after this daily stand-up? And can we explore together what you're trying to get at with the acceptance test? What business priorities are you trying to focus on so I can effectively guide my testing? Listening to the team, active planning. So if you remember that story I told about being in the background with the planning, I actually want you to be upfront in the planning. I want you to be asking lots of questions, actively planning, actively challenging developers. What do you mean? What are you going to do? Why is it 2 points? It's going to take me days to test that. Why is it not going to take you days to test that from a development perspective? Challenge the status quo. Be bold. Be a risk taker. And then accept failure. Show failure. I have this view of Agile teams. How do you continuously improve if you don't fail, if you don't stretch, if you don't take risks? But show the team that you're willing to take risks. You're willing to fail, but fail forward. Fail forward with a purpose. So the retrospectives is a wonderful place for you to challenge the team, the dynamic, the quality proposition, the outputs, the doneness criteria, the planning. It's not just the testing aspect. It's every aspect. Automation strategies. We're not building our unit tests or failing too frequently. We're commenting out unit tests. When push comes to shove at the end of a sprint, let's not do that anymore. I've noticed we're doing that. We're not holding to our doneness criteria. We're not holding to our principles. I really expect testers, and this may be unfair, but I expect you to be that quality champion. And the retrospective is a wonderful place to challenge the status quo. The final myth, and then we'll wrap up the webinar. And I hope you're enjoying this. I hope this is my real hope is this is aligning with everyone's experience and sort of inspiring you to think about mapping from traditional practices forward. But the myth is business analysts capture customer requirements and testers test them for completeness. So it's sort of that waterfall. You're at the end of the pipeline. You're not. You're just in a verification phase. You're sort of at the mercy of development and their implementation, and what you get versus you're comparing the output of development to the output of the requirements. Very often there's disconnects, but you're capturing them late. So it's sort of that to me is a myth. The reality is you need to begin to partner with the customer and stakeholders and product owners and whatever you want to call them to produce software that solves their problems. Wow, I have an error there. Their problem. So I have a bug in this slide. I apologize. So before I get email from everyone on the phone, I acknowledge that there's a bug on this slide. So you want to move to the front, and you want to help define and refine user stories with your product owner. Yeah, I think that this notion of user stories, there's another myth that the product owner owns the stories. I think the team owns the user stories, and I think testers are this wonderful partner to the product owner. You can help them refine stories. You can ask questions. You can add acceptance tests. You can help the team to add acceptance tests, meaningful acceptance tests that guide the business logic, that guide the design of a story. You can write test stories. If you need to create infrastructure, if you need to create a test plan template, if you need to update testing infrastructure, if you need to do some exploratory testing evaluation or training, you can write stories for that from a testing. But not only can you need to. You want to actively participate in sprint reviews. I like the model that when a team shows off their results at the end of a sprint, that every team member gets up on stage, they get their moment in the spotlight, their 60 seconds or 90 seconds of fame, and they show what they've done. I like testers showing automation running, or showing what they tested, why they tested it, show their risk-based plan, show one slide that says, this is how we attack testing as a team. This is why I guided it this way. These are the results that we found. These are bugs we found and we fixed. This is what we're delivering. I'm putting a stamp on this with the team. I'm proud of this work. Every team member can jump up on stage. So you're not just demoing features. You can demo activities. You can demo, I think you want to share with the organization that testing and quality matters. Not just that. You want to show that you're the champion, and you want to show what's going on in that team. What are you doing about it? Not just lip service. What practices are you? What are you practicing? What are you doing? And it makes a tremendous difference. I know that the business gets excited about that. They may not show it to you, but they're getting excited about a holistic view. And you want to show value for automation. Place those testing. Not only just talk a good game about your test investments into, Cucumber or ATDD or BDD or all of the DDs, but show what's going on and show that it's making a difference. Show that you're having less escapes into the customer's hands, sprint by sprint or release over release. I'm a little bit over time, so I want to wrap up quickly. So I think that Agile, and I'm kidding here, so anyone who's affected by the Great Depression and is depressed by this comment, please don't be depressed. I think Agile testing is the best. Agile is the best thing that's happened to testers since the Great Depression, and I mean this wholeheartedly. Not the Great Depression part, but it's fostering a whole team view, testing, metrics. So we're starting to shift from test metrics to team metrics. I think that's incredibly healthy. A whole team view to automation, whole team view to planning, reporting, quality. We all own quality. No longer should we be asking that question of why didn't we find that in test? That question should no longer happen. Read my lips. We should facilitate feedback. Wonderful feedback loops, multi-tiered automation. So don't get stuck just using a single tool. Don't take, I think it's unhealthy now to take a singular tool from the UI downward approach in automation. I think we want to attack the application from different levels because of the maintenance challenge. You want to be just in time, just enough. You want to apply risk-based testing techniques. Those are traditional techniques. Don't throw them out. Bring them to bear. Continuous improvement should be the mantra. The team should always be improving. How do we get better? How do we produce better code? How do we get better integration? How do we get customer feedback earlier so that we don't have a wasted loop? And then trust the team. You want to trust each other and expect your leadership to trust your judgment as a team. So I hope this webinar met some of your expectations. There's 7 key areas, attitudes, mindsets, shifts that I want you to think about making when you go from traditional to Agile. I meant every word I said. I know some of this is fearful and challenging the status quo, but I think your Agile teams, if you move in this direction, ultimately they will respect you. They will love you for it because you'll become that wonderful quality sort of champion within the team that they need. So that's how I would like to leave it.
Great, thank you, Bob. Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
You're welcome.
Thanks for a great presentation. Now, we already have some questions coming in. I have one here from Predrag Skakovic, and he's asking, in your experience, why do teams fail in escaping these myths?
Repeat that, please. Why?
In your experience, why do teams fail in escaping these myths?
I think it's history. I think a lot of this, it's a mindset change. I think we're human beings. So I mean, one reaction to that is I think we're creatures of habit, and we get accustomed to sort of doing things the same way. And then not just testers. I think organizations. I think teams. I think developers. I think in terms of there's patterns or there's games that we've danced this way. We've danced this way for 20 years. We're going to continue to dance this way. So I think it's those patterns that sort of drive a lot of these myths. We're in our comfort zone. Agile is very disruptive, I think, from testers' comfort and teams' comfort from where testing fits. Let's not pick on testers. I think Agile is very disruptive for traditional project managers as well. It challenges almost every aspect of how they've approached things. It doesn't throw it out. That's the challenging bit. It doesn't dissolve every technique they have, but it shifts, or it requires, a shifting or a morphing of their techniques towards a more collaborative approach, towards a more holistic approach, and that can become uncomfortable. So I think that it just takes time for organizations to change. It also requires courage. It's really hard. It's that risk-taking, that courage, to challenge your team members, looking a developer in the eye and say, you should have done better. You should have caught this defect earlier. Let me help you do that. I think there's courage it requires in testing, and it's worth it. The teams I've coached, at least, I see teams moving, and it takes time. It might take a year for a team to truly morph from traditional mindsets to Agile, but it's a journey, so keep that in mind and just be persistent. But it's worth that journey. It's wonderfully powerful when a team is truly sort of collaborating around quality and sort of getting it. It's just wonderful to see that. So I hope that helped the answer.
Great, thank you, Bob. We have a few more questions, actually. We have one from John Galbraith, and he asks, do you have any tips on shifting traditional-minded POs towards Agile testing?
I don't know. I think what you need to do as testers is start, so it's a whole team view. So I think we start, getting them to attend webinars like this, getting them to read some of the literature, getting them to attend sessions, shoving books. I wrote a book on product ownership, and I devoted, and I'm not selling my book on the webinar, so please don't take it that way, but I have an entire chapter in the book that I talked about quality from a product owner's perspective. And I was very specific about that and intentional about that. So I think if you're building an effective product, if you have a 360 view, then the quality dimension is incredibly important, not just to the testers, but to the product owner. That's part of their job. They need to be incented. They need to look at that as part of their role, not just flushing features out the door, but flushing high quality features out. Flushing is probably the wrong word, but getting high quality features out, that's their job as well as it is the team's job to do that. So I think some training, I think some collaboration with them, I think showing them how quality impacts, so building in quality, focusing on that, reducing rework will actually have this effect of getting more done. So as you build automation, as you improve the quality of the team, shining a light for your product owner and saying, aha, this is actually not just lip service, it's not conjecture. We're focusing on quality, and by doing that, we're getting more done, and showing them that. They'll see that it'll give them that business connection back to the business, back to throughput. So just some ideas about that. But a final point is, hopefully in your organizations you have Agile coaches or folks who are more experienced. You're not in it alone. Your organization should be surrounding you with some Agile expertise. Call them Agile coaches. It's a role that I play. And you should be getting help from them in sort of converting, if you will, the product owners from a traditional to more of a quality-centric as well as business-centric mindset. So look for help.
Great. We have actually quite a few questions, about 5 or 6. So if we don't get to all of them, Bob, is it okay if people email you with their questions?
That would be actually fine. I would take, I think we're only going to have time. I'm a man of time boxes, and Agile is about staying on time and time boxing, so I can't help myself. So we could maybe take a couple more, Miriam, and then anything that falls out of the queue, I would encourage people to email me their questions. Absolutely.
Sure, great. So we might do 2 more. We have one from Paul French. Can you breed Agile methods when testing occurs remotely to the development team?
Can you do what to Agile methods? Can you apply them?
Can you breed, B-R-E?
I missed the one word. Can you?
Breed, B-R-E-E-D.
So I'm going to say, can I leverage Agile? I'm not sure. I'm missing the question, but let me dive in for time's sake. Can we leverage Agile if we have distributed testing? If testers and developers are apart, that could be a part in a building, and that could be a part across 12 time zones. I think so. I've seen it. It's harder. It's incredible. It's much harder. It requires tooling. It requires software. It requires hardware. It requires video conferencing. It requires simulating face-to-face conversation as much as humanly possible. It requires pairing. So testers and developers should sit down and figure out how do we WebEx, how do we pair, and be resistant to, you know, any sort of, that may be painful to set those up, or you may be able to talk yourself out of it and say, oh, I don't want to get up at 7 o'clock. It's not worth it to pair with that tester in India at 7 a.m. in the morning. And I would say tough. As an Agile coach, you have a responsibility to your team to do great work. You need to believe in testing. You need to move along that line. And you need to believe in pairing and work together as a team. That was tongue-in-cheek a little bit with tough, but teams need to collaborate. You need to invest in collaboration because of the value it provides. So I think if you invest in that, if you take it seriously, if you have Agile in your bones and you're committed to continuous improvement, or you're getting Agile in your bones, then I think you're willing to commit to that, and I think it can work very well. That's not optimal, and I will clearly say that, and it's going to be frustrating at times. And I would encourage you to push your organization to figure out, you know, can we move testers and developers together? Can we close the time zones? Can we form teams in such a way so that there's less time zones between team members so that they collaborate more effectively? I think organizations have been lazy, and they've sort of, when they throw teams together, particularly enterprises, they have people spread around the world, and then but they don't think about cohesion, whether it's Agile or Waterfall, and they just cobble together individuals and they expect great results. Well, those individuals can't work together very well. They don't even do any startup or introductions. So I think that over time, if you're really investing in Agile and you see the benefits, you want to, I think you can reorchestrate teams differently so there's better cohesion. So that's an organizational commitment to pulling together teams. When you're orchestrating teams, when you're instantiating teams, think about those things. Think about time zones. Think about collaboration. How about one more question?
Okay, let's do one more question. Before we just jump into the question, a lot of people are asking, can they have a copy of the slides? We can make that available. Is that okay, Bob?
That's a beautiful last question, Miriam. Yes, that is absolutely fine, and that's our last question. So, you know, anyone, like I said, feel free to email me, and I will try. Be patient with me, but I will try to answer every question I get.
That's great. Thanks very much, Bob. What a great webinar today, and we've had quite a lot of attendees, so thanks to everyone for attending. Now, just before I wrap things up, I might give you guys a taster of our next webinar, which will be with Ruud Chunison, and he's going to be talking about moving into the cloud and make sure your test approach is cloud-proof. So in this webinar, Ruud will share with you an experience-based approach for testing cloud services and help you find out how to link cloud-related risks inventively to new and updated test measures. So the kind of key learnings, you'll learn how to identify specific requirements, risks and test strategies for your company to migrate applications to the cloud. Further details of that webinar will be announced via email shortly and on the EuroSTAR website. So once again, I'd like to thank Bob for a great webinar today. This webinar has now ended, and there will be a recording available shortly via email. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.